Hi everyone, I am finally back. I apologize. I'm going to read 2 more chapters of the Helen Keller book. Alright, so we're on chapter 3. Even in her dark world, Helen had happy times. She loved to be outdoors. She'd feel her way carefully along the walls of the house. Helen loved to touch all the plants that grew around the house. She smelled the flowers. Soon she could tell plants apart by their feel and smell. This was how she got information. Helen learned to do simple chores. She folded the clean clothes. She knew which clothes were hers. She also learned that her mother put on her coat. She was going out. Helen tugged at her coat to go too. There's a picture of Helen in her house, feeling the wall, and here's Helen right here in front of the fireplace. But for Helen, everyday mishaps could turn into dangerous accidents. Once Helen spilled some water on her apron. She wanted it to dry, so she held her apron near the fireplace. She did not know how close she was to the fire. Her apron burst into flames. Quickly, her nurse used a blanket to put out the fire. It burned only Helen's fingers, slightly, and singed her hair. Singed her hair. Helen had been very lucky. As she grew older, Helen developed a sense of mischief. She liked to play tricks. One day, Helen found some keys. She knew that the key locked doors. Her mother was in the pantry getting something, and Helen was right outside. Helen took the keys and locked her mother in the pantry. Her mother pounded on the door. She yelled to be let out. Helen sat on the porch where she could feel the vibrations of her mother's pounding. Helen sat there and smiled. Mrs. Keller was locked in the pantry for 3 hours. There's the pictures. There's Helen right there, and that's Helen locking her mom in the pantry. You can see she's giggling. She's yelling to get out. Helen and a young servant named Martha Washington often played together. Martha was a few years older than Helen, but Helen was the bossier of the two. One day they were cutting out paper dolls on the porch. Helen soon grew tired of this, so she cut off all the flowers growing on vines near the porch. Still bored, Helen decided to cut Martha's hair. Martha said no at first, but then gave in. Few people said no to Helen, so Martha's hair soon lay at her feet. And then, because she felt that it was only fair, Helen let Martha cut her own long, golden hair. Helen's mother was not happy with either child. Helen's other friend was the family dog, Belle. Helen tried to teach the dog her signs, but the dog would just sleep or run off after a bird. Helen could not understand why Belle was such a poor student, and so Helen passed her days. There's Helen with Martha, hair cutting. There's the kitty, or the dog, sorry, not the kitty, it's the dog. And then there's Helen on the porch. Then when Helen was 5, her sister Mildred was born. Suddenly, Helen's world changed. Someone else needed her mother's love. Someone else sat in her mother's lap. Helen became jealous of the baby who seemed to be taking her mother away. One day, Helen discovered her baby sister sleeping in her doll's cradle. Helen grew very angry. Before anyone else could stop her, Helen pushed over the cradle. Mildred tumbled out. Luckily, Mrs. Keller caught Mildred before she hit the floor. Now, Mrs. Keller realized that Helen was not only a danger to herself, she was a danger to others. If Helen's mother could not control Helen, who was still a young girl, what would happen when Helen got older? Helen had to change. The Kellers took Helen to another doctor in Baltimore, Maryland. The doctor was an eyesight specialist. Again, the Kellers heard the same words. There was nothing the doctor could do for Helen. But the doctor did tell Captain Keller about Alexander Graham Bell, who lived in a nearby Washington, D.C. Bell, who had invented the telephone in 1876, was also a former teacher of the deaf. Perhaps Bell might know someone to help Helen. For the first time in a very long while, the Kellers felt a little bit of hope. All right, so there's the mom with baby Mildred, and there's Helen, who's very, very angry and upset and jealous. There's Helen with the baby Mildred in her crib, about to tip her over. All right, so Alexander Graham Bell. Today, Alexander Graham Bell is best known for inventing the telephone, but he also worked all his life to help the deaf. His mother was nearly deaf. As a young man, Bell taught deaf children. He used drawings to teach the deaf how to use their tongue, lips, and vocal cords to speak. One of the deaf students he worked with was Mabel Hubbard. She had lost her hearing as a result of an illness as a young girl. A bright and eager girl, she made great progress. In time, the two fell in love and married. Bell's work with sound and speech helped him create the telephone in 1876. All right, so chapter 4, A Ray of Hope. Accompanied by the captain and her aunt Evelyn, Helen went to see Dr. Bell. Her mother carefully curled Helen's hair before she left. Helen looked like an angel. She was about 6 years old. Ow. All right, so over here is Belle that I read about. And over on this page is Helen and her parents seeing Belle. Helen walked into Belle's office, and the two became friends right away. Helen got on Belle's lap. The young child and the inventor felt at home with each other. Helen later wrote in her autobiography, "He understood my signs, and I knew it and loved him at once." Belle felt that Helen could learn. He thought she was a smart and sensible girl. He wanted her to succeed. Maybe, just maybe, Helen Keller could lead a more normal life. Bell gave Helen his watch to play with as he talked to Captain. He told Captain to write the Perkins Institution for the Blind in Boston, Massachusetts, later called Perkins School. Dr. Bell told Captain that 40 years earlier, deaf-blind child Laura Bridgman had been taught to read, write, and talk with hand signals. He was sure that Kellers could find a teacher for Helen there. There's Miss Helen. Once back at home, Captain wrote to the head of the Perkins School. Captain Keller wrote that he needed a teacher for his daughter. The Kellers waited anxiously for his reply. Michael Anagnos, the head of Perkins, wrote back that he did have a teacher in mind. Her name was Anne Sullivan. The Kellers were thrilled. What they did not know was that Anne Sullivan still needed to be convinced to take the job. Who was Anne Sullivan? Anne, or Annie, as she was called, was an orphan who had a very hard and lonely life. As a child, she had been partially blind. She was sent to the Perkins School, and later on, operations restored her sight. Anne graduated first in her class at Perkins. Like Helen Keller, she was very bright and also very stubborn. All right, this is Anne Keller right here. And that's over here, you believe it looks like Anne with Helen. At 20, Annie had never been a teacher. She was not sure she could do the job or even that she wanted it. Mr. Anagnos kept encouraging her. He felt that this lonely, intelligent young woman would be right for the job, and Annie did not have any other choices open to her. It was either the teaching job or a job in a factory. Annie decided to take the job with the Kellers. Annie took 2 months to prepare for her new job. She had met Laura Bridgman. She learned the manual alphabet. She talked to Laura by spelling into her hand. Now she studied the different ways to teach the manual alphabet. Annie prepared the best that she could, but she really had no idea what lay before her or how her new job would change her life. Thomas Hopkins Gallaudet of the Hartford, Connecticut, was the man who brought education to deaf children in America. He wanted to help his neighbor's young deaf daughter, Alice Cogswell. In 1816, Gallaudet went to Paris, France, to study at school for deaf people. After a few months, he returned to America, determined to start his own school. He brought a French sign language teacher back with him. In 1817, Gallaudet founded the nation's first school for deaf people in Hartford, Connecticut. Soon other schools for deaf people opened. Then in 1864, Gallaudet's son founded Gallaudet University in Washington, D.C. There's Thomas Gallaudet, who opened the first deaf and blind school, or the deaf school. Alright, so that was chapter 3 and 4. I hope everyone's enjoying this book so far. Hopefully, my plan is to read 2 more chapters tomorrow. I'm sorry, again, it took me forever to get back, so I hope everyone likes it. If you have any questions or want to talk about anything, please let me know. And down below, write stuff. Alright, thank you, have a good day!